educationists can truly transform our future. The importance of education is highlighted in both our national and global response to this current pandemic. It is extraordinarily impressive that within a few days, literally a few days, after the the genetic sequence of the coronavirus 2 was put out on the web in China, scientists all over the world not only started analyzing the sequence, both for testing and for vaccines, and also for drug development. That speed of action is possible only through decades, indeed centuries, of foundational education. What does education do? It allows you to be prepared for the unexpected, and indeed, even for the unknown. It's only through education that one gets knowledge, through knowledge discovery, through discovery the tools for action, and through action we can alter our circumstances. Now, there's another issue about education and action, and this link to action, and that is where today's world poses enormous challenges. That link comes from what education, and through that, all the steps I told you about, have altered the planet in extraordinary ways. Since over 10,000 years, since humans domesticated plants and animals, the tools of learning have been passed from generation to generation in a manner linked very directly to practical purpose. Through this, humans have done two things. They've both understood nature through their learning and discovery, and they've also altered nature. So we've become, through understanding nature's engineering, we've become those who have also started to engineer nature. And this is truly extraordinary. And you can see this in multiple ways. At one level, you can see how language and culture has evolved. And at the other level, you can see how the tools of engineering have allowed us to make buildings, make aircraft, understand biology, and so on and so forth. Now, the result of this, and this is where I'll come to about our education now, the result of this is we've had an unbridled charge of the planet and have changed the planet in extraordinary ways. Two important consequences of this, other than the principal one of industrial growth and development and the change in the human condition. Two other important consequences are the consequences on our biodiversity and our environment, and the other is the consequences through climate change. So we have therefore become people who wield the paintbrush on the future of the planet rather than becoming mere objects painted on the canvas by natural selection and evolution. This poses an enormous responsibility, and this poses a particular responsibility in a country like India with a large young demography. Our large young demography has been stated as an enormous dividend, and indeed it is. But that dividend now must be looked at in the context of the post-COVID world, and indeed in the context of how the world at large will view such large demographies. What will happen is the following. If we educate our people, and education means now in today's world multiple approaches and not just science and engineering, and I'll come to that in a bit. If education on scale happens, then we will be prepared to deal with a world which is going to be very complex. That complex world is going to be substantially anchored on the sucking up of data from multiple resources, its distillation, its analysis, its conversion to knowledge and to implementation. And that will result in a small set of organizations, typically large companies, holding power in decision-making over a very large number of people. Now, this is by no means inevitable, and this can be stalled and changed through the democratization of knowledge. And the democratization of knowledge means the access to opportunity for everyone. And the access to opportunity principally lies in the access to opportunity for health, nutrition, and education. If these three are taken care of, then we are in a very strong position. For them to be taken care of, it requires that education be the principal fulcrum on which all these others move around. And that's because through education, everything else can have an enormous impact. We should not view education as entirely a utilitarian aspect in this world, though, because education should include a very deep rootedness to one's culture and to one's surroundings. And therefore, education needs in today's world to be principally bilingual. We should be able to do anything, read and understand and study any subject in both our native languages and, let's say, in English. This is very important. This opens up opportunity to an enormous number of people. Today, our education system at the higher education level, for example, which I'm usually concerned with, we have about 90% of our resources going to institutions, the central government and other institutions, a few state government institutions, which constitute about 10% of our students go. 90% of our students go to state universities, and there, a very small fraction of our research funds go. And if you go further to the primary level, for example, the situation needs enormous change there also. So bilingual education opens up opportunities which today are restricted to these few percent of people, and that's a very important opportunity which needs to be opened up. The second aspect is we must stress at early stages the learnings in music, mathematics, and logic. These three are areas which you can learn well early, and conversely, if you don't learn well early, you find it difficult to learn them well later on. I would include physical activity and sports over here. If these are the anchors of our early stage education, we cannot go wrong. Layered on that, there will be other aspects of specialization. Would you like to be an artist or a scientist or an artisan or an engineer or a doctor? Those come later on in various aspects. Now, in this situation, what is the role of corporate social responsibility? It is all too feasible, and this, of course, must be done, where each of our corporates invest in areas which are close to their heart, where they see value. There is no point in investing your valuable earnings in areas which you are not convinced about. That, of course, should be there. In addition, it would be very valuable to get together, such as CSR Box very nicely does, to coordinate this in a manner so that different sectors of education have impact disproportionate to what each of us can potentially give. And therefore, coming together of giving as well as the organization of the connect is extremely important. And that can happen in multiple sectors. There are areas in our country where extraordinarily bright children have very little opportunity. Those areas need to be stressed because the diversity of people coming in to the job market, to the learning sector in multiple ways is something very, very important. So a combination of people getting together and looking at areas of focus and how they can invest in contexts where there's little opportunity is very important. I'd like to end by saying, suggesting how this can be done. It is, of course, important that we look at, for example, the new education policy, the ways different state governments function in education, the way the central government functions in education, and so on and so forth, and learn from that. One very good example, which needs to be scaled in every state and expanded, is the Navodaya Vidyalaya scheme. The Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya is there in every district. It's a residential school. It has people from all typically from poorer economic contexts, and the quality of education and the connectivity is very, very high. That model, there are Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas in every district. That model needs to be scaled up hugely in a self-propelled manner by state governments, by NGOs, through CSR, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that they have to be residential schools alone. There can be multiple types, but I'm referring to the quality of the school education. Similarly, at an earlier stage, in terms of primary education, and in daycares, where education in some ways principally starts, that again is an area which needs to be scaled enormously. Today we have a situation where a very large part of our workforce migrates to different parts far away from their homes, leaving women with little children to deal with education. This should change, of course, in terms of having jobs closer to home. But while that happens, it's also important that women and children have access to education locally. Now, in conclusion, I'd like to say that there are extraordinary tools available which allow the components of education to reach the last mile. But we mustn't forget that those tools alone are not enough. Long distance learning tools, textbooks available on the internet, all of that are very valuable. There is no easy substitute for quality human interactions. These tools are a reasonable approximation in some contexts, but they're not sufficient. Therefore, training teachers and interacting with them, having super teachers who train other teachers is very, very important. So therefore, whether it is, the microcosmos, looking at what is around you, or the cosmos itself, looking at the stars and everything in between, education will succeed when corporate social responsibility and governments come together to learn best practices and train teachers in a manner so that they can set up and run schools and various other education centers in a large-scale context. I'm delighted to be here again, and thank you very much for having me. And my office and my colleagues here are always there to work with you to ensure that programs in education are scaled and succeed. Thank you very much.